When Mrs. Carver swore she'd caught the vandal red-handed, the whole block believed her. They didn't expect the cameras to expose a very different truth. The air that afternoon was warm enough to soften the edges of the day, the kind of late Saturday glow that made the world look forgiving at least from a distance. The sun hung low but bright, spilling golden light across the neat rows of houses that lined the quiet street. Lawns looked freshly trimmed, their lines sharp and proud, each blade of grass a testament to the invisible competitions of suburbia. Somewhere far off, a lawnmower droned like a sleepy wasp, and the smell of cut grass lingered in the air. Malik walked along the sidewalk at an easy pace, his sketchbook tucked under one arm the way some kids carried sports gear or a favorite book. At 16, he carried himself with a quietness that was not shyness exactly, but a kind of practiced calm that knew when to keep the head down, when to smile politely, when to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. His hoodie was plain, gray, soft from wear, paired with jeans that had begun to fade at the knees. A pencil, the one he used for almost everything he drew, was tucked behind his ear, leaving a faint smudge of graphite on his skin. Now and then he'd glance at the shapes of houses, at the curve of a tree branch, at the way the light hit the mailboxes, storing them away in his mind for later sketches. 2 houses ahead, Mrs. Carver stood on her porch like a sentry posted for duty. She wasn't lounging or enjoying the sun like some of her neighbors. No, she stood with her arms crossed tightly against her chest, as if holding herself together. Her gaze was fixed, not just watching the street, but watching over it, the way some people watch a child near the edge of a pool, intent, unblinking, ready to intervene. The fine lines around her mouth were etched deep, not from smiles but from years of holding her lips in tight, dissatisfied lines. The brim of her sun visor cast a shadow over her eyes, but even in shadow Malik could feel them following him. The neighborhood liked to say it looked out for its own, the kind of phrase that made it sound noble, even neighborly. But Malik had been here long enough to know that watching could mean more than just keeping each other safe. Watching could mean judging, measuring, deciding who belonged and who didn't. On most days, he would keep his gaze forward, walk at the same steady pace, and slip out of sight without incident. But today, something in the air felt different, not dangerous exactly, but heavy, like the way the air feels before a storm. From her perch, Mrs. Carver didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't give the casual nod people gave to acquaintances. They passed often enough. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, her body leaning forward just enough to let Malik know he had her attention. He wondered if she saw the sketchbook, or if all she saw was the hoodie, if she noticed the pencil tucked behind his ear, or if her mind had already filled in her own picture of who he was and what he might be doing in her part of the street. A soft breeze moved through the trees, sending a scattering of small leaves across the sidewalk in front of him. The world, from the smell of sun-warmed wood fences to the quiet hum of air conditioners, seemed normal, looked normal. But there was a tension beneath it, a kind of stillness that wasn't quite peace. In that stillness, Malik took one more step forward, and Mrs. Carver's eyes didn't waver. Somewhere inside, a curtain shifted slightly, as if someone else was watching from behind it. Malik knew this pattern. He had felt it before, the kind of watching that wasn't about protection at all. Malik was just 3 steps past the end of her front lawn when the stillness shattered. The sound came first, not a polite call or a question, but the sharp clap of rubber soles on concrete, moving fast. Then her voice, slicing through the warm air like a cold wind. Malik froze, one foot hovering just above the sidewalk before it landed. He turned his head slowly, half expecting she might be talking to someone else, but Mrs. Carver was already marching toward him, her visor bobbing with each determined step, her arms swinging with purpose. "You think I didn't see you?" she demanded, her voice pitched high enough to carry across the street. "Do you think you can just walk by here like nothing happened?" Malik blinked. I'm sorry." The words were instinctive, not from guilt, but from confusion, his voice catching in the dry air. Mrs. Carver jabbed a finger toward her backyard gate. Her nail painted a brittle shade of pink that had begun to chip at the edges. "Don't play dumb." That Malik followed the direction of her finger. There, on the side panel of her wooden fence near the gate, was a crude spray-painted tag in thick black paint. It dripped unevenly down the boards, the wet sheen catching the afternoon light. The letters didn't spell anything. Malik recognized just messy loops and jagged lines, angry in shape and careless in execution. His stomach knotted. "Ma'am, I didn't save it," she snapped, stepping closer. The scent of her floral perfume mixed unpleasantly with the sharper, chemical temps of fresh spray paint. "I saw you earlier, hanging around here. Now I've got this on. My fence." Mollick's voice stumbled over itself. "I wasn't here, I was at the park. I was drawing." "Oh sure," she cut in, her tone dripping with disbelief. "That's convenient. I suppose the paint just magically appeared while you were off being the picture of innocence." Her words were loud enough now that the air seemed to ripple with them. The hum of the lawnmower down the block stopped abruptly. Curtains shifted. In 2 different houses across the street, a door clicked open somewhere, the hinges creaking. From the corner of his eye, Malik saw movement. Mr. Hughes, the older man from 2 houses down, leaning slightly on his porch railing, his brows pulled together in concern. A woman watering her flower bed a few doors away set her hose down, droplets scattering over her sneakers. Her gaze locked on the scene unfolding. The attention pressed in on Malik, hot and heavy, like the sun had drawn a spotlight directly onto him. His hoodie suddenly felt too warm, the fabric clinging to the back of his neck. Mrs. Carver took another step forward, her voice dropping just enough to sound more dangerous. "You've got nerve, walking past my house like you didn't just vandalize it. People like you think there aren't consequences." Mollick's mouth went dry. He could feel his pulse in his throat, steady but forceful, a drumbeat against the quiet that had fallen over the block. He wanted to explain again, to tell her about the sketchbook, about how his pencil was still tucked behind his ear, about how his hands were clean, no trace of paint, no guilt. But every time he opened his mouth, she filled the space with more accusation. "Look at it," she said, thrusting her arm toward the fence again. "Still wet. You probably didn't even think I'd notice until it was too late." Mollick's gaze lingered on the graffiti. The paint was indeed wet, beads of it glistening in the sunlight. But if she thought that proved anything, she wasn't thinking about the time it would take for someone to walk from the park to here. "I didn't do it," he said finally, his voice quieter now, but firm in a way he hadn't expected. Mrs. Carver's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me. I've lived here for 20 years. I know when someone's guilty." Her voice rose again, cutting through the heavy afternoon air, and Malik could feel the neighbor's eyes like physical weight. Against his back, some looked curious, others skeptical, but all of them were looking at him. In that moment, Malik realized this wasn't just about paint on a fence. It was about the fact that she had decided without proof, without even a question, that he was the one who did it. The street seemed to hold its breath. Even the breeze had gone still. Malik adjusted his grip on his sketchbook, his thumb pressing into the worn cardboard cover. He thought of the park just an hour ago, the shade of the trees, the scratch of pencil on paper, the quiet peace of being somewhere no one was watching him. Now, here, every pair of eyes told a different story. Some saw a boy accused, some saw a suspect confirmed, and at least one Mr. Hughes looked like it might still be searching for the truth. Mrs. Carver's hand went to her pocket with the precision of someone who already knew exactly what she was going to do. The glint of her phone's case caught the sunlight as she drew it out, her thumb already swiping across the screen with a practiced urgency. "That's it," she said, her voice clipped and cold. "I'm calling the police." Mollick's breath hitched. The word police hung in the air like the crack of a starter pistol, sharp, undeniable, and terrifying. His fingers tightened instinctively around his sketchbook, the cardboard edges digging into his palm. He wasn't guilty. He knew that. But that had never been a guarantee of safety in stories like the ones he'd grown up hearing. Stories where boys like him didn't get to explain. A small tremor ran through his hands, not from shame, but from something colder, deeper, the kind of fear that makes you acutely aware of every breath you take, every movement of your own body. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ma'am, please. I didn't do anything." Mrs. Carver didn't look up from her phone. "Oh, I think you've done enough." Her fingers tapped with sharp precision, as if every letter she typed was a nail in a coffin. From the porch down the street, Mr. Hughes's voice cut through, warm but edged with concern. "Now, hold on, Evelyn. Maybe you should slow down a second." Mrs. Carver's head snapped toward him. "Slow down. You can see it as well as I can, Walter. Fresh paint. Him walking right by. What else do you need?" Mr. Hughes leaned a little, heavier on his porch railing, his white hair catching the light. I need a little more than assumptions before I call the law on a kid." His eyes flicked toward Malik, the crease between his brows deepening. Mrs. Carver scoffed. "Oh, please, I know his type." The words landed like a stone in Malik's chest. They were heavier than the accusation itself, because they weren't just about this fence. They were about him, or at least, the version of him she had decided existed before he'd even opened his mouth. The air around them seemed to draw tighter, heavier. Somewhere nearby, a bird cut off mid-song, the trill fading into silence. The faint hum of the lawnmower down the block, which had been a constant background note just minutes ago, was gone. It felt as if the whole neighborhood was leaning in, now, listening, weighing every word, every breath. Malik's mind raced. He'd seen videos too many of moments like this spiraling out of control. He'd seen how quickly fear and false certainty could turn into something irreversible. His mother's voice echoed in his head. "If it ever happens, stay calm. Keep your hands visible. Don't give them a reason." Mrs. Carver lifted the phone to her ear. "Yes, I'd like to report Evelyn." Mr. Hughes's voice was different now, firmer, almost commanding. It made Mrs. Carver pause, if only for a heartbeat. He stepped off his porch slowly, walking toward them with a careful pace. His hands were in plain sight, open at his sides. "Before you go making calls you can't take back," he said evenly, "why don't you check your new toy?" Mrs. Carver frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Your security camera," he said. "You bragged about it to half the block last week. Said it could catch a squirrel stealing a peanut from 10 feet away. So why not check if it caught this?" A flicker of uncertainty passed across Mrs. Carver's face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. She folded her free arm across her chest, tightening her grip on the phone with the other. "I don't need to check it to know what happened." "That's just it," Mr. Hughes replied. "You think you know, but maybe the camera sees better than you do." The silence stretched for a moment, taut and thin. Malik stood perfectly still, his eyes darting between them, unsure which way this would break. Mrs. Carver's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't have to prove myself to anyone." "No," Mr. Hughes said, his voice quiet now but steady. "But if you're right, the camera will prove it for you. And if you're wrong," his gaze softened just slightly, "then maybe you'll realize the damage you were about to do." The weight of those words seemed to settle over the street like a cloud, thicker and darker than the heat of the afternoon. Malik could feel the shift, not resolution, but a pause. A chance. Mrs. Carver's thumb hovered over her phone screen. The call to the police just one tap away. But for the first time since she'd stormed toward him, she wasn't moving forward. The world held still, waiting to see which way she'd turn. The silence between them stretched, taut as a wire. Malik could hear his own heartbeat, slow but deliberate, like a drumbeat echoing inside his chest. He shifted his weight slightly and glanced again at the fence. The paint still glistened in the sunlight, the black so deep it seemed to drink in the light around it. Droplets clung stubbornly to the grain of the wood, trembling as if they might fall. He drew a careful breath. "The paint's still wet," he said, his voice low but steady. He lifted his hands, palms open. "And there's nothing on me, no paint on my clothes, no paint on my hands." Mrs. Carver didn't even glance down. "Cluff," she said, flatly, as if the single word erased his entire point. "You'd probably tossed them somewhere before strolling past here like butter wouldn't melt in your mouth." Malik bit the inside of his cheek. She wasn't listening, she wasn't trying to. He could feel it in the way her eyes skipped over him, never truly seeing him, only seeing what she wanted to see. Still, something tugged at the corner of his mind. The smell of the paint, sharp, acrid, was strong, too strong for just the fence. His gaze drifted past Mrs. Carver toward the side of her yard. That was when he noticed it. Near the gate, tucked almost out of sight, sat a dark green trash bin, the kind the city collected once a week. The top was closed, but on the front right corner, barely visible unless you looked closely, was a smear of black paint. It was subtle, a faint streak, where someone's hand or a can must have brushed against it. The mark was uneven, thicker at the center and thinning at the edges, like it had transferred from something wet. Malik's brow furrowed. The smear was low enough to suggest someone had set something down beside the bin, maybe even tried to hide it there in a hurry. His first instinct was to point it out, to walk over, wipe his finger across it, and show her the fresh paint on her property. Maybe then she would pause, maybe then her certainty would crack. But another thought followed hard. On its heels, one that twisted in his gut. What if pointing it out only made her angrier? What if she decided he'd put it there himself? What if this whole thing got worse? He imagined the headline in his mind. Teen caught tampering with evidence at scene. He imagined the look on his mother's face when she heard. The smear sat there like a whisper of the truth, tempting him, daring him to use it. Mrs. Carver, meanwhile, had folded her arms again, the phone now gripped loosely in one hand. Her voice was quieter than before, but no less sharp. You kids think you're so clever. Spray a fence, hide the evidence, act innocent. I've seen it all before. Moloch's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her she hadn't seen him before, that he wasn't the story she thought she was watching unfold. But the words stuck, caught between the urge to defend himself and the instinct to keep his head down. From the porch, Mr. Hughes was still watching, his expression unreadable. The woman with the hose had quietly stepped back into her yard, but the blinds in 2 other houses remained tilted just enough to suggest someone was still peeking out. It was strange. Malik thought, how much power could exist in the space between speaking and staying silent? He took a small step back, enough to put a breath of space between himself and Mrs. Carver. You can check if you want, he said carefully. I'm telling you, it wasn't me. Her mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. We'll see. Malik kept his gaze steady, but inside, the conflict gnawed at him. If he said nothing, the truth might stay buried. If he said too much, it might bury him. The smear on the trash bin caught the sun again, a dull glint against the green plastic, like it was trying to signal him. He wondered, briefly, how many times the truth had been sitting in plain sight, ignored because no one bothered to look in the right place. The standoff might have lasted longer, if not for Mr. Hughes's voice, steady and deliberate, cutting through the thick summer air. Evelyn, he said, using her first name in that slow, measured way that made it sound heavier. Didn't you put in that brand new camera last week? The one pointing right at the street. Mrs. Carver blinked, the question landing somewhere she hadn't expected. Her eyes darted toward her front porch, where the sleek black camera sat above the door like a watchful eye. Yes, she said finally, her tone clipped. Why not check it? Mr. Hughes asked. If you're so sure, the footage will prove it beyond a doubt. And if not, he let the sentence trail off, but the pause said everything. For a moment, Malik thought she might refuse outright. He saw the hesitation flicker in her posture, a shift of weight, a tightening of her grip on the phone. Then her chin lifted, and her lips curved into something smug. Fine, she said, like she was humoring a child. Let's go take a look. This will clear everything up once and for all. She turned on her heel, marching up the steps to her front door. The sharp click of her sandals on the wood echoed in the quiet. Malik stayed rooted to the sidewalk for a beat too long, unsure if he was being invited inside or led into a trap. Come on, Mrs. Carver called over her shoulder. You want the truth, you'll see it. The invitation felt less like a kindness and more like a dare. Malik exchanged a brief glance with Mr. Hughes, who gave the smallest nod encouragement, maybe, or reassurance. Inside, the air was cooler, scented faintly with lavender air freshener and something sharper underneath, perhaps the lingering trace of cleaning products. The blinds were half drawn, letting in muted shafts of sunlight that painted the cream-colored carpet in pale gold. Mrs. Carver strode into the living room with the confidence of someone who believed she was walking toward vindication. On the coffee table sat a sleek tablet, its black screen reflecting the ceiling fan above. She snatched it up, tapping the screen awake with quick, practiced movements. Let's see, she murmured, swiping through a menu of thumbnails, each one a frozen slice of the street outside. Malik stood near the doorway, his fingers gripping the strap of his sketchbook so tightly his knuckles whitened. His pulse thudded in his ears, not because he feared the truth, but because he knew what would happen if it wasn't enough. If even proof couldn't break through her certainty. Mrs. Carver found the right timestamp and pressed play. The tablet's screen filled with a grainy but clear view of her front yard and the stretch of sidewalk in front of it. The footage showed a wide shot, the curb, the fence, the empty driveway. There, she said, leaning closer. That's before. Wait for it. Malik stepped closer, his eyes locked on the screen. The footage rolled forward in quiet, uneventful stillness. Then, from the right side of the frame, a figure came into view, himself, hoodie on, sketchbook under his arm, walking at the same steady pace he remembered, only the fence was already marked. The black tag glared against the wood, glistening faintly even in the camera's daylight filter. Mrs. Carver frowned, her lips parting slightly. That's odd. Must have missed it earlier, before she could finish. Another figure appeared on the playback. Not one, but two teenage boys, both in baseball caps pulled low, one with a spray can in hand. They moved quickly, glancing over their shoulders as they scrawled across the fence in hurried strokes. The sound on the recording was muted, but Malik could almost hear the hiss of the paint. The boys laughed, shoving each other as they worked, then sprinted out of frame the way they'd come. Mrs. Carver's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Well, maybe. She trailed off, eyes darting between the footage and Malik. Mr. Hughes, standing just behind her, let out a slow breath that was almost a sigh. Doesn't look much like him, does it? Malik stayed quiet, the tension in his chest loosening. In tiny increments, he didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just watched her. The weight of her earlier words still heavy in the air. Mrs. Carver set the tablet down on the table a little too quickly, as if eager to be rid of it. I must have been mistaken, she muttered, though the words sounded foreign in her mouth. Mistaken, as if that erased everything. Malik knew better. The footage loaded slowly, a spinning circle pulsing on the screen like a heartbeat in the silent room. Malik stood near the doorway, his sketchbook still clutched under his arm. He could hear the faint ticking of a clock on the mantel, each second stretching longer than it should. Mrs. Carver sat rigidly on the edge of her couch, chin high, as if bracing for a moment of vindication. Mr. Hughes lingered beside her, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Finally, the video appeared grainy, but clear enough. The street stretched across the screen, framed by neatly kept lawns and the warm afternoon light. Malik's figure entered from the left. He was walking at his usual slow pace, eyes down at his feet, the sketchbook visible against his side. He never even glanced at her fence. The graffiti was already there thick. Black lines slashed across the pale panel, glaring against the sunlight. The room went so still, it felt as though the air had thickened. Malik swallowed hard, his heartbeat slowing from its panicked drum. There it was. Proof. He wanted to exhale, to unclench the tight coil in his chest, but he didn't move. He didn't trust the moment yet. Mrs. Carver shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to the fence on the screen, then back to Malik. Well, perhaps it was, she began, but Mr. Hughes held up a hand. Let's keep watching, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Mrs. Carver clicked ahead in the footage, the video skipping forward. Then the next clip began, and the truth came spilling out in sharp, undeniable frames. Two boys, maybe 14 or 15, came loping into view. Both white, both in baseball caps, turned backward, laughing as if they owned the afternoon. One held a can of black spray paint, shaking it with a metallic rattle before pressing the nozzle to the fence. The other kept glancing over his shoulder, like it was all a delicious game. Thick black lines bloomed on the wood. Deliberate and careless, they laughed harder when they finished, one of them tossing the can into the corner, near Mrs. Carver's trash bin. It hit with a hollow clink before they jogged off in the opposite direction. No hoodies, no sketchbooks, no Malik. The laughter from the video seemed to echo in the room, even though the sound was muted. Mrs. Carver's face drained of color. She sat frozen, the tablet still in her hands, her knuckles whitening around its edges. I must not have been able to see clearly earlier, she murmured, her voice brittle, like glass about to crack. From the porch, it was bright. Maybe her words tangled into silence. Malik's eyes lifted, meeting Mr. Hughes's across the room. There was no gloating in his gaze, no smirk of victory, just a deep, unspoken understanding. The older man's lips pressed into a thin line, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. Malik could feel the heat of the afternoon pressing in from the windows, mingling with the faint hum of the air conditioning. Outside, a bird trilled once and then went quiet again. Somewhere far away, a lawnmower restarted, its drone faint and distant life continuing as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. For Mrs. Carver, it was a fracture in the certainty she'd worn like armor. For Malik, it was another moment, one of too many, where he'd been seen, not for who he was, but for what someone assumed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth was playing in an endless loop on her screen, the black lines of the graffiti and accusation that no longer pointed toward him. Mrs. Carver set the tablet down on the coffee table with a soft thud. I suppose I owe you an apology, she said, her voice thin and unsteady. She looked at Malik for only a second before glancing away again. Malik gave a small nod, not out of forgiveness but acknowledgement. His grip on his sketchbook loosened, and he let it rest at his side. The temptation to say something, to call out the weight of her words earlier, the sting of the stares from the neighbors pressed against him, but he held it back. Sometimes silence was its own kind of power. Mr. Hughes broke the pause, clearing his throat. "I'll go talk to the boys' parents," he said quietly. "We can't have them doing this again." Mrs. Carver only nodded, her posture smaller now, her shoulders curling inward. Malik turned toward the door, the late afternoon light spilling across the living room floor. As he stepped outside, the golden rays hit him full in the face, warm and steady. The same street stretched before him, the same lawns, the same sky, but it all felt a little different now, as if the air itself had been shifted by what had just happened. The eyes of the neighbors who had gathered earlier were gone, curtains drawn back to their usual places. The moment had passed, leaving only the quiet hum of the neighborhood. Malik took a deep breath and began walking again, his steps even and unhurried. The sketchbook was still under his arm, the pencil marks inside untouched by the accusations that had almost defined his afternoon. Behind him, Mrs. Carver's porch sat empty, the white railing catching the sun like nothing had happened at all. But Malik knew, and so did she, that something had. The police arrived later that afternoon, a patrol car humming softly as it rolled to a stop in front of Mrs. Carver's driveway. The two officers stepped out, their boots crunching against the gravel, and after a brief exchange with Mr. Hughes, Mrs. Carver reluctantly handed over the tablet with the security footage. Malik stood a few paces away, his hands in the pockets of his hoodie, not out of defiance, but to keep them from trembling. It wasn't fear anymore, it was the lingering echo of everything that had just happened. The memory of her voice snapping like a whip. The sting of her words, "I know your type." The officers didn't take long. By evening, the truth had names. 2 boys, barely 16, both living 3 streets over. The footage was crystal clear, caps pulled low, spray cans in hand. Their laughter sharp against the still night air as they defaced the fence. One of them even posed for a picture, a mocking grin plastered across his face, unaware the camera was watching. When the news broke, it was Mr. Hughes who told Malik first. He found him sitting on the front steps of his mother's porch, staring into the fading sunset. "They got him," Mr. Hughes said, his voice low but certain. Malik looked up, his expression unreadable. Yeah, couldn't deny it, not with that footage. "They'll get community service, maybe a fine. Their parents are embarrassed." Malik nodded once, slowly. There was no satisfaction in his eyes, no sense of victory, just a quiet, almost weary acceptance. Word traveled fast in their neighborhood. By the next morning, the story had already been retold and reshaped at least a dozen times. Some said Mrs. Carver had screamed and pointed before checking the facts. Others whispered about her face going pale when the truth played out on her own tablet. Mrs. Carver herself kept her head down. She didn't come to Malik's house. She didn't knock on his door or meet his gaze when they crossed paths. The closest she came to an acknowledgement was a tight, awkward nod one afternoon as they both happened to pass on the sidewalk. Malik returned it, but without a smile. It wasn't enough. It wasn't an apology. Still, the absence of words spoke its own language. Everyone knew what had happened, and perhaps, Malik thought, that was enough for now. Children playing on the street started waving at him again, just as they used to. The old man on the corner, the one who sold homemade peach pies on Saturdays, called him over for a free slice, just because. Even Mrs. Linton, who had always seemed guarded, made a point of greeting him with a warm good morning the next time they crossed paths. But something had shifted inside Malik, something more lasting than the sting of that afternoon. He had seen, up close, how quickly suspicion could turn into accusation, and how easily an assumption could harden into what someone believed was truth. The evening air was cool when he finally walked past Mrs. Carver's fence again. The graffiti was gone, scrubbed clean and repainted. The wood smelled faintly of fresh paint, and for a moment he could almost imagine none of it had happened. But the memory was there, etched deeper than any spray paint could reach. He paused for just a moment, staring at the place where the black letters had once screamed accusations without words. In the silence, he could hear the faint hum of a distant lawnmower, the chirp of a bird somewhere in the maple tree overhead. The world had moved on. But he knew that if he hadn't stayed calm, if the camera hadn't been there, the story could have ended very differently. The narrator's voice, soft, yet firm, seemed to thread itself through the quiet. It's easy to point a finger when we think we know the truth, to let our eyes and our fears guide our judgment, without stopping to ask if we're looking in the right direction. But sometimes, the truth is only revealed when we have the courage to see past our own assumptions, and the humility to admit we might be wrong. Malik took a breath, then turned and kept walking, the evening light stretching his shadow long across the pavement.